Hello, everybody. It is Hastur, and in this video, we will be talking about, once again, propaganda. This is part 5 of dissecting the techniques of language that propaganda uses. In this one, we'll be talking about section E, as you can kind of see it up there, just right up there. In this one, we'll be talking about the techniques of form. This is how you draw the conclusion of what you're trying to present. And it's not exactly about what you're saying, but why you are saying it. That is the best way to put it. So to begin with, let's get into this. And as we go, make sure to go to agloa.org, agloa.org, and you can find their resources that I will be citing through this, and you can follow along. So number one of section E is concurrency. Concurrency. Two events that are seemingly related, but aren't really a cause of one or the other, are attributed to each other. As stated in the gamebook definition, because things exist or appear simultaneously, it is claimed that one is the cause of the other. The form of the argument is as presented. Instance A is present along with instance B. Therefore, A is the cause of B. But they are just two concurrents of a situation. And because they are both concurrents, i.e., like after effects of the prior thing, they can't be the cause of one or the other. Basically, there has to be something prior to them that would cause it. Right? A good way to imagine it is I will quote the positive conclusions and the negative conclusions that are provided in the book. For instance, a positive conclusion, or positive connotation rather, or positive inference to be made. And once again, propaganda can be used for positive or negative. Very, very rarely will there ever be one that is exclusively good or bad. All right. So a positive example would be a school award. All of the schools that have won this award had female principals. So illogically, that was supposed to be in air quotes and much quieter. But air quotes logically, the principals being women mean that women are better principals. Now, if you actually pay attention, all the schools that won, yes, had female principals, but the female principals is just by chance. Like there's nothing to indicate the connection between the two. Equally, in a negative connotation, when a CEO was the CEO of a department, serious corruption was uncovered in one of the bureaus. All right. So, hey, he was chair when there was corruption found. I don't want him as my boss because there was corruption under his watch. Well, just because there was corruption doesn't mean that he was in on it. That is another example of like concurrent events. Every now and again, you can really find them just out there. It's one of those you'll know it when you see it, especially. But it's very easy to miss them. But effectively, it is you have overall situation, and then two things that are happening in that situation at the same time. People will miscontribute one of those things being the cause of the other when they're not. But that is concurrency. Now, similar but different is ad hoc. Or post hoc, not ad hoc. Words are hard, I'm sorry. So, post hoc. Post hoc is effectively, because they happen in succession, this is not at the same time, but in succession within a time frame, that the preceding event must have caused the following. So, a good example of this is a reasonable logical conclusion of post hoc is I knock on a door and the dog barks inside of the house. Me knocking on that door is 99% going to be the reason why the dog is barking. Now, if I were to knock on the door and the house explodes, I wouldn't say that my knocking on the door caused the house to explode. Right? At least I hope. But that is effectively what post hoc is. Post hoc is the faulty conclusion of one thing being the cause of the other just by sheer happenstance. But, for example, as a positive conclusion from the book, go to the website, read the book, do the thing. Sarah got her hair styled by Sason on Saturday. Sason? I don't know. Then shot her lowest score ever in golf. Sason styled her hair again today, so I'm expecting her to shoot well in the tournament tomorrow. Uh-oh, my dogs are raising hell. One moment. Alrighty, and I'm back. Sorry about that. But yeah, post hoc, if I remember right, basically two things happen that are unrelated, but, logically there's a conclusion between them. Or rather, illogically, there's a conclusion between them. A good example of this is, I believe it was the pilot episode of Criminal Minds. The one lady would see numbers and she just knew that something had to be done. She had to do certain things because one time something bad happened and it freaked her out so badly. So logically, because she sees a series of numbers, then she has to do something. Otherwise, something bad's going to happen. Because previously, something bad didn't happen. Now, there is no logical sense to this, because post hoc is a faulty analogy of events. So, yep. That is post hoc. I know, I explain things terribly. You're welcome. So, after post hoc... Uh-oh. Oh, okay. I thought I was going to burp. All right. After post hoc, we have selected instances. Now, selective instances... Selective... Meh. But, anyway. There we go. Selective instances is effectively, I'm going to cherry pick reasons, and that is what I'm going to base my argument off of. The best way to describe it is, that people saying, "Oh well, uh, airplanes are the safest form of travel." Well, yeah. How many airplanes are in the sky, and how many times do they just magically crash? How many times do you get a little bit of ice on the roads and skid off? Or better yet, one of the famous ones. Well, sharks only account for like 2 dozen deaths a year. I think it was 2 dozen. Hold on, let me double check that number. How many people are by sharks a year? Oh, so it's even less than that. All right. So sharks kill an average of 5 people a year globally, according to recent data from the Florida Museum of Natural History, the International Shark Attack File. In 2023, for example, there are 91 shark bites worldwide with only 10 fatalities. Consistent with the 5-year global average, these incidents are typically unprovoked and often result from mistaken identity as a shark confusing a human for prey like a seal or a fish. Charles Jaws, having his remora turned away since before the dawn of time. Do you know how fins you were going, sir? But yeah, you can make the argument, selected instances here, you're more likely to be struck by lightning than you are to be eaten by a shark. Well, no fucking shit. I don't live in the ocean. I mean, hell, I've only ever been to the ocean 5 times, if even. And like, it was all in a controlled instance. So to say, oh, well, you're less likely to die from being eaten by a shark, well, you can selectively instance that because you don't live with the fucking sharks. But that being said, selective instances can also be the inverse of that. Instead of picking something that is like the small minority of things to talk about, you can talk about the large majority and exclude the minority. An example of this would be to ignore what was it? God damn it. I'll remember it eventually. I'll like yell it halfway through this. But effectively, you can select a very small instance of things like the sharks. Like sharks are completely safe. Only like 5 people die from them a year. Well, how often do people hang around sharks? Along with that, you can be the negative of that, where you exclude the minority and specifically focus on a single large majority, right? Like kills 99.9% of bacteria. We're just not going to talk about that 0.1%. Like, granted, a 0.1% doesn't really matter, but for selective instance, but very, very more often than not, common, you're going to see I'm going to select a small number over a large number. So, continuing on, we have hasty generalization. So, effectively, hasty gen is, write it down. Not Hastur. Yes, Hastur generalizations. So, hasty generalizations are, I'm going to jump the gun because I believe that I've seen enough and I don't need to see any more. I will conclude everything over a large majority because of my first impression. Well, if I'm going to use the The good old, I go to a restaurant and it's bad, so the entire chain must be bad. Well, that's not necessarily true. That is a very hasty generalization. Like, for instance, I have a buddy who hates Arby's. He is, in fact, wrong. It's not an opinion, it's just incorrect. But he had like one bad time at Arby's and he was like, yep, never going back. Which you can argue that, that Arby's might be, that one Arby's he went to might be bad. But saying that all of the Arby's everywhere are bad is not accurate. So, by quoting the book, the arguer jumps to a general or blanket conclusion about members of a given group on the basis of an unrepresentative or insufficient number of cases. The form of the argument is A1, A2, and A3 are B. Therefore, any and all A's must be B. It is different from selective instances because this requires the first ones, like the beginnings of being used. Like you can make the argument that you can use selective instances. Like you can, hold on, let me just, like you can combine these two. They do combine, but you can have them individuals, like as individual instances, right? So that is hasty generalizations. I'm going to jump the shark. And because I haven't been bitten by a shark, they all must be completely safe. They're not. But anyway, after hasty generalizations, we are now on to number 5. Number 5 you should recognize because number 5 is, hold on, let me go back to the brush. Faulty analogy, or as I like to call it, faulty analogy. Long story short, this is the faulty analogy is kind of a blanket term that you can use for all of these, but it in and of itself can actually just be its own thing. So I'm gonna use what the book says as the good example. To reason analogically is to reason that because two or more things or types of things are alike in some or one or more aspects, yep, okay, I did read that right. We may call this the antecedent resemblance, the prior resemblance. They will therefore be found alike in some other respects. The consequent resemblance. In cases of reliable analogies, the antecedent factor is already known to have some bearing on the consequent factor. In faulty analogies, such as knowledge is lacking. That reads very weirdly. But effectively, apples and oranges. All right? Apples and oranges grow on trees. Therefore, apples must be oranges. Well, they're not. They do both grow on trees. They are both fruits, seed-bearing fruits, but they are not the same thing. It is a faulty analogy. Same thing with apples and pears. They are very similar, but they are different. You can see this kind of, you see this nowadays when people argue that, oh, you're arresting someone, you got to be a Nazi. Well, I guess the Nazis did arrest people. Yeah, some, actually broke the law and the majority didn't. But in the modern day, just because someone is arresting someone doesn't make them a Nazi. It is a faulty analogy. You're comparing literally apples to oranges. The only similarity they have is that they are law enforcement, and that is it. So that's faulty analogy. Revisited. Going further, we go on to number 6, composition. Composition is very much because one thing is part of a greater thing, that greater thing must be equal to that part. So hold on one sec. Let me, because it is composition and division are the following ones. Yeah. Number 6 and number 7 kind of go hand in hand. They are like the opposites of each other, so I'm going to do both at once. Bam. So composition. Now I can actually do a fairly simple diagram for this. Sorry, my throat is very ticklish right now. But let's say I have a group of people or a selection of things, right? And within that selection, I have this tiny, tiny box. Now, this box is bad. We don't like this box. But because this box is part of the greater whole must be like this box. And thus, the greater whole is bad. So, that is what composition is. The part is equal to, or the sum of the parts is greater. Words are hard. The sum of the parts are equal to the worst part. A common example of this is the chain is only as strong as its weakest link, which in that case is pretty much true. But in the case of like a group of very different things all put together, you can't just use one example to ruin the bunch. Equally, following that is division. Division is the backwards version of this. So imagine this. You have a group of people or things, not unlike this one, and inside you have a tiny, tiny box. Okay? Now, because all of this is bad, okay, this part also must be bad, which isn't necessarily true. Like, for the best way to put it is, you can have the most like terrible, no good, very bad person in the world, and because he can do one good thing, but you have to ignore it because he's the worst person in the world. Meanwhile, and that is for, hang on. So, composition is effectively, you can do 100 wonderful things. You can, I sat out and I pointed to the houses and I said, I built all these houses, but no one calls me the house builder. I pointed to the walls and said, I built all these walls, but no one calls me a wall builder. I paved all these roads, but no one calls me a road paver. But I fuck one pig. That is composition in a nutshell. Whereas division is, you know, you can say, damn, Hitler was an okay enough painter, but he did a lot of far, far worse things. So a lot of people just say, no, he painted terribly. Which, I mean, in my opinion, his paintings are all right. I can't do architecture paintings, though, so maybe it's just because I can't do that. But that is the composition and division. That is 6 and Uh, I'm gonna refrain from the joke this time. And lastly, for section E, we have the oddball. This one holds a slightly different meaning in like more common connotation. Um, this is, hold on, the bam. Wow, that fucking was bad. So, number 8, non sequitur. Non sequitur. Basically, I'm pulling shit out my ass that has nothing to do with this. Yeah, it is. Oh, I'm sorry I was late. My car my neighbor was struck by lightning. I don't know what your neighbor has to do with anything, but why the fuck were you late? Because my neighbor was struck by lightning. Well, what the fuck does your neighbor have to do with you? Yeah, non sequitur is basically I'm pulling something way out there. And now I'm linking it to an event that has nothing to do with it. For instance, an example from the book is Mr. Bailey's car isn't in his regular parking space. I bet he isn't coming to work today. Just because he isn't in his usual spot doesn't mean he's not coming to work. Or, another example from the same book that you should be reading on agloa.org is David has never smoked a cigarette in his life. He must be afraid of contracting cancer. Now, you can get cancer from eating broccoli or, asbestos, the asbestos rock. So just because he doesn't smoke doesn't mean he doesn't want to contract. Well, no one wants to contract cancer. It doesn't mean that he's afraid of contracting cancer. It just means he doesn't smoke. You're pulling like two very wildly out of their conclusions, or you're putting two wildly out there statements and you're putting them together as like like a beginning and a conclusion, even though that they aren't connected. Now, that being said, there is nuance to a non sequitur. Sometimes it is just a statement. It's not necessarily, oh, because A, then B in a non sequitur stance, but it can very well be an A, then B, and it's just a statement. So, an example that is provided in the book, you should read it, is health is important to us. A trusted doctor can help calm our fears and offer encouragement when sudden aches and pains occur. So, health is important. That is like the leading statement. The following statement is a trusted doctor can help calm our fears and offer encouragement. Those two aren't non sequitur from each other because they do involve each other. And it's also not saying that it's not drawing a conclusion, but it is making a statement that is trackable through sound logic. Yes. Because B is important. It's not saying, a wildly outrageous B. And then there's another example. The techniques for making computer chips are almost perfect these days. Statement. There's no use paying big bucks for Intel computer chips. Let's just buy from an off-brand company. Any chip we get stands a great chance of being perfect. The logic is sound here. By, the process being refined down to near perfection. It doesn't matter if you go with the big name brands, because it is so perfect that even a small off-brand can do it. It does follow. It is logical. It is not a non sequitur, it is just a non technique. And while I'm at it, because I'm pretty sure section F, yeah, section F has 10, so I will talk about it here in section E. This is the universal zero. No technique. This is either a sound logical argument that does not follow any of the other instances. It is a factual statement, and or it is provable, and it can be nuanced, because very rarely will you see like a politician or a newscaster use a no technique. Funnily enough, a fairly good example of someone who doesn't do techniques, like who does a no technique, is actually Steven Crowder. Other times he can do a lot of different techniques, and a lot of it is for comedy, like subversions and, shifting expectation. But he will cite stuff. And because he provides resources and uses specific citings to prove what he says, he actually does no technique. It sounds a little out there, but that just is what it is. So, that being said, no technique is there is no technique. And along with that, another way to the third way to do a no technique is to emphasize or state that this is an opinion. Like I can say, like, I believe Steven Crowder does not do no techniques because of this. He makes sure that his opinion is known, but then he also cites information that he uses to draw his conclusions. He is making it based on logic and resources that are available to him. He's not just pulling it out of his ass, and he's not basing it solely on perception. Now, that is, once again, my opinion. So that is like the three things of no technique are factual, obvious opinion, and sound logic. All of these, well, not all of these, but one, if not more of these, are necessary to have a no technique. Like I can have something completely unfactual and something completely devoid of sound logic, but if I say it's my opinion and I make sure that it is obvious, it is a no technique, because I'm no longer trying to bullshit you into it. I can factually state something. Like I could give you tech specs of my computer, and it won't be like section C's numbers. It would just be factual that my computer has this, and this. It is not an opinion, and there's no logic to be made because it's not an argument. It is just factual. Equally, with sound logic, I can say that waffles are better in some regards to pancakes because they can hold the syrup and pancakes cannot. That is a sound logic. That is technically a no technique, even though like it is an argument and it is opinion. An opinion. But it is based on sound, provable, followable logic of the four that I have mentioned previously, the forms of reasoning: detachment, contrapositive, disjunctive, and hypotheticals. Yeah. So here, specifically the waffle ones. Uh, waffles, if P then Q, waffles can hold more. Thus, waffles can hold more syrup than pancakes. Thus, waffles must be better. That's kind of the that's kind of the thing. Now, once again, this is obviously an opinion. So, in my opinion, waffles are better than pancakes. It is a no technique now. Even though, like with sound logic, my logic is because A, thus B. Because they hold more syrup, they are better. You can clearly follow the logic behind that. And you can make the argument that, well, pancakes are fluffier and don't crunch, thus they are better in that regard. So once again, that's a no technique. That is just I am drawing a conclusion based on something observable, something relatively factual. So, but that is enough of my rambling for this episode. For this one video, this will be part 5. Part 6 will be coming out shortly, where we will talk about section F. But until then, be sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. And while you're at it, go ahead and hit the like button. And I will see you next time. Later.